Okay, so I wanted to talk about a couple of other techniques before I go and get dinner here. These are techniques for animating just various animation machines that we can create quite easily. So, from cell animation technique, we know that you can use a uh, cell animation techniques in the game engine to create an animation. So, let's just say that we have like grass that's you know, blowing in back and forth in two directions. Okay, so would have been better if I had done that, but anyway. So you want to use guides as much as possible, but they can sometimes get in your way. So let's just make sure that they all line up approximately at the same point. Okay. Now I've drawn them too close together. So each of these has to be a separate image, and you would simply cut out the part of the image. This would be a 5-frame animation of grass blowing, so a single blade. So we have one, and then we have another. Okay, and we're going to use multiply so that we can see how it got in the way. So we can see that they line up. In fact, overlay is a better choice. So we're using overlay here, so you can kind of see, or actually we're going to use lighten. So lighten will allow us to line up the bottoms of the grass blade. So it's anchored at that point. And I guess I copied the same image, so let me grab another one. Okay, and let me use overlay again, just to, oh, here, we'll use linear dodge to kind of move it so that the base of the grass is always in the same place. When we're done, we can just make it normal again. Let me get the next frame. Oops. Okay, so there's the next frame. I'm going to move it up in the layer stack so we can see it. Use multiply, or rather overlay or lighten. We'll use linear dodge to make sure that the bottom layer fits on there. Grab the next frame. Now, 5 frames is not enough to fully convey the swaying back and forth. We can loop this back and forth in a ping pong, where it would go front to back, back to front for the movie. So again, we're anchoring it at the bottom there. Okay, so we're anchoring it. So now we've got 4 of the frames. We'll grab the last frame just for completeness of this demo. So grab that, put it there, move it up here, approximately where it needs to be, linear, and it looks like I guessed pretty well there. Let's get it to line up. Okay, now we're going to put them all back to normal mode. And I can kind of, you know, make them invisible and then kind of play them through just to see how that's going to look. So, okay, so not too bad. So then we're going to use a common cut cutting area, and if I hold shift I can get it into a square. So now that it's in a square, I can you know, select each one and use Control-Shift-C to grab the entire square. And then I'm going to create a new image, and for each frame in order, so I had to back up there, so I'm going to paste and then move the layer underneath. Then grab the third, okay, and put that there, and move that up to the top, okay, and then the next one, okay, and it looks like it's still anchored approximately, but I can tell, and it really has to be this precise. If I zoom all the way in, how about right there? You can see that it's close, but it's not exactly in the same place. So we want to make slight adjustments so that they all sit at exactly the same place, if possible. The center of this, if you imagine this is a circle here, there's a center point, that has to be the same on each one for the best visual effect possible. So we're just going to play with these 4 frames. I know there's, well, for completeness, we'll do the last frame. So the last frame is this one. I'm going to copy that. I'm going to paste it there. And then, you know, this is an onion skinning technique. We're like, okay, it looks like that now. Alright, now we can change the size of the image to fit into 64 by 64. This does make it smaller. It's going to be about that big on a 1900 by 1200 screen. This is not the entire screen. The screen is actually about this is about a quarter of that screen. So that gives you an idea there. Now, maybe that's too big for a blade of grass. Let's change the image to, say, 32 by 32. And that's a pretty good size. But that'll be really tiny. So, again, about half is what we're going to see on on the smaller screens. Maybe the iPhone as well. So iPhone will be even smaller. The iPhone would be like that big. So just to give you an idea of what we're talking about. So that's about 50% of the original. So let's go back to the original size. So we're playing with that size of an image now. And that's pretty good for a blade of grass at 1900 by 1200. So we have this little animation that'll ping pong back and forth. Okay. Now that we have that, we have one that can be placed many times, but again, there's a limit on the number that we can do in a sequence. So keep that in mind. If we wanted to have 1,000 blades of grass, that would definitely affect performance, and it wouldn't be that big. I'd say you could probably fit, I don't know, 250 in this area. So you wouldn't want to do that. And again, 25,000 is not what's on the screen. 25,000 is the total number of in a level. There are some optimizations that will make that a little bit better over time. I think maybe we could double that number, but that's about it. So this is a good example, but you would actually want to do some. So you would maybe take the canvas, since blades of grass move in tandem with one another, you would change the width, and maybe we'd want to do a segment that's, say, at least 512 long, right? So we would repeat this blade of grass and make a segment of grass that moves. So we'd have to repeat that animation on each level for each blade of grass in that segment. And this is a metaphor, and not only is it a blade of grass, but it could mean anything. A gear or a set of gears or whatever else it would be. So keep that in mind. Now, maybe we want to add one more layer. So anyway, there's that. And I wanted to mention that that is another method, another technique that we can use. Also, variations on this, changing the color and such, could be done at this point. You want to find really the optimal point to make changes like that. For the blade of grass, it would be before you repeated it a million times, you would want to change the color, or perhaps even after, because you can always add a filter at the very end that does a color filtration before you save it. Also, in the game engine itself, we can tint anything, so even making it grayscale would be a good idea, but it would all be the same tint. So if it's has multiple colors in it and we tinted it, those multiple colors would be tinted towards that tint color that we choose inside the program and not inside the image itself. So keep that in mind. Let's talk about distressing real quick. I'm going to use the mock-up for that. So to create variations on tiles, you would want to maybe get one copy of the tile. So we'll copy this. And again, we'd be precise in the real world or whatever. And then we're going to, oops. Let's go back there. Copy, new. Okay. So it would be 128 by 256. So we're filling that. So, okay, we've got the one. Now that's the background layer. And on top of that, maybe we would want to create some variations. So let's pick a brush that does kind of a distressing look. And we'll choose a color. Maybe a rusty color. Kind of a reddish color. And then we're going to do color. I'll try it with the color layer. So you could do blood this way, blood spatter. You can also take an overlaid image, and so you want to kind of create a composite out of an overlaid image. I happen to have or know of a good free splatter image that's online that we have in our repertoire. Whoops, no, just splatter, not Splatterhouse. So here it is. This is a free splatter image. We don't want to use it verbatim, but we could use segments of it. So here we go. So it's really high resolution compared to this. So we're just gonna fit it into that area, and then we're gonna do lighten. No, we're gonna do darken. Darker color, I guess. All right. Well, so this is where you get a chance to experiment with the various effects. You can see here that worked pretty well. This was color burn, and so you've got a nice custom splatter. Now this is non-animated and can't be manipulated by the user, so it couldn't be that if they touched it, it would splatter more. You also have the option of using an additive layer, so you could just have it as a normal, and then we could apply this to certain tiles in a layered effect. But regardless of which way you choose, you would want to create many variations of that original tile, and some of them could fit together like puzzles in a puzzle piece. So here we have one, and then we would make a copy of that and maybe save it in a third file. This is the composites. So we would have the layer file that we're playing with, and of course I can move this around, or let's unselect. So I can move this around and create another one, okay? And then I can create a composite of that, and then I come back and I add it to my composite list, so I can go through my composite list and take a look at that. Now you'll see how the edge here is red. Maybe you would want to have one that played off of that went next to it. So you have those options to kind of create a more complex scene. Likewise, and we talked about this with the computer, and one thing that I wanted to point out was that on the computer, remember the computer from before, let's see if I can find it in here. Right, so yeah, I don't know if I have that one anymore. Well, I don't seem to have it. But you remember there was a computer image, and we wanted to do an animation there. So in the game, we can make physics objects that are based on chains. So let's create a new playing board or whatever. And just create lots of PSDs. I mean, you certainly want to group things together that are of a similar work session, but ultimately you want to create a lot of them. So let's see here. So let's say we have an animation built in Blender. I guess for the purposes of this technique demo, we're going to use an animated GIF. So let's go look at animated GIFs real quick. Okay, here's a great one, I'm sure. Does it work? Yes, it does. Okay, this is a great animated GIF. We can't use it directly. However, if you wanted to download something like this, which a lot of them are free, and then break them apart using some animation GIF animator program, that's fine too. But you would have animated this in Flash or some other animator, After Effects, whatever it is, and then you would take that and you would apply it to by exporting individual frames, just like the animated GIF but broken up, and then that could be kind of overlaid into a computer. So let's just take one of the images. Here we go. So now we have this image of a digit. It's one in a series, and we can animate that way. Let's go quickly to a chain. So the way a chain would work in 2D is you would have a chain, a single link. Okay, so here's one link in the chain, and then maybe you would have another link, and this one actually, so I used the circle tool there. Now I'm creating another link, okay, but it's going to be from the side. Okay, so now we have two links. Now note, I've used additive blend here, and that's how the engine will work. So each of these would be the parts, right? And then the game engine would basically do a rotation, kind of like what the game engine would do. Let me draw a little schematic for you. We would have some points here, okay, and each one of these represents the same thing as this point right here. So it would take this layer and it would place it let's grab a piece. Alright, so we've got this chain link, so it would go like that, and then the next piece would be the circle, so that would go like right here, centered on that point. Actually, that's not true. It would, wait, yeah, it would. So the circle points, they don't rotate, but the other points would rotate. So we could create a chain that way. And this point would be the center point of the circle and also the top point of this. So they would have to be around the same size, so maybe 32 by 32 or 16 by 16. And then we would apply a transformation in OpenGL to cause it to move. And I can't demo that right now, but essentially, you know, here you have maybe the movement direction, okay, and that would cause it to bend the chain appropriately, and maybe there would be a weight at the bottom, which rotated based on its hook point, which would happen. So you can imagine. I can't really. Let me try this. So this would be the weight at the end of the chain, and that would hang, you know, roughly right at the end here, or the center point of this. So there would have to be one more circle. So let's grab that. I think it's this layer. So you can imagine a chain this way to do kind of a chain effect, and you would just repeat that process up the chain. And so that's how that would work, and then would anchor at one end, and you could have a special image that designated the anchor point. So let me draw one real quick. The anchor would maybe look like a hook, okay, and it swings from this pulley or this hook, and so that would be centered there, and or that could be a custom distance from the rest of the chain. So it could appear there if we wanted, where the bottom is the center point, kind of like these. So that's how a chain would be made, and you could use that for whatever purposes. And so we're going to be doing that effect as well, and that's another type of machine that's created. Now, I think that covers pretty much all of the most fundamental level of designs for different machines, but you can really imagine the combination of these machines creating some interesting and realistic areas. We haven't talked about fluid yet, but there is kind of an idea that we'll have a fluid engine that generates sinusoidal wave patterns, but that'll require special texture techniques that are unique to that shader. It'll probably be a shader for that. So there's some other things to touch on about chains and animations that are stored, also doing variations. You can, of course, like I showed you in the first video, create a very big custom area, say like that, which is repeatable, and then other repeatable parts. There's no requirement of the game engine for the parts to be equally placed like that. So instead we've got, and while that would be one optimization layer, we don't necessarily require that. So here we have a custom area that's kind of, you know, in its own area. It's not equidistant, so they're not really stuck together. They're just stuck there. There's also, so here we have a barrel, right? I'm just going to grab this barrel, create a new image, okay, and fill the background here with black. There we go. Okay, so we've got our barrel image, and you can imagine for a second, okay, so we would center it. We would try to make it as neutral as possible as far as the color choices. See, there's an assumption here that the color is coming from the right, and that can translate into some weird looking stuff. Luckily, it's very easy to flip an image this way, okay, and it's very easy to flip an image this way in the game engine, but it's not necessarily easy to redo color mapping like that. However, you know, the other technique for this would be to render a barrel in Blender. A good thing to look at to give you an idea of what is possible is if you look at the Ethanol Engine. So we're not exactly like this, but it's going to be similar to this. So go check this out on Google. But it uses per pixel lighting techniques like I showed you in the prior forward shading demo with the multiple layered cube. Here we have an engine that's based on that same technique that looks really beautiful. We're hoping to create something similar to this. We don't have the lighting down yet, but it's on its way. And here we have an example of it, and you can see how the barrel is lit differently depending on its location. We want to do this, but we don't want to depend solely on this. We want to use multiple techniques. But let me show you what the barrel looks like. I think I have Ethanol somewhere on my hard drive, but if you download it, you can look at their source files. Oops, I ran it. Let's see if I can load a project. Okay, so here's Ethanol, and Ethanol has a sample project, and in the sample project it has an entity, and in the entity it has the normal maps. Whoa. Open a new window. Okay, so let's get out of Ethanol real quick. So here's the barrel, and this is the normal map for the barrel, and you see that they do this normal mapping technique actually for every type of image or every object in their world, but their objects can't fall over or roll, I don't believe. So there are some limitations to each of these techniques, but if I make these images bigger, you can kind of see like the lighting uses this layer to kind of to light it, and that's how you create the illusion of 3D. Here we have some pillars and a plant. This statue is a great example. So they had a 3D model of a statue, which they then used Blender to render a normal map, but they can't rotate. They're always in the same orientation. So let me find, well, let me go up here, entities. Okay, so then here's the color map, and then the, I believe it's a reflection map, a gloss map. So we can do the gloss map, we can do the normal map, we can do a parallax height map. We just don't have the forward shading technology yet, but it is coming. However, we don't really do decaling yet, but that's certainly something that's on its way. Decaling is how they do pockmarks. So if I zoom in here, that is as big as it gets. So you can compare the barrel itself, right? That's the drawing of the barrel, and then this is the barrel's normal map that describes, and it's actually in a higher resolution, that describes how the barrel is shaped. So just kind of compare here. That's what they're using to do that technique, and we can do a similar technique. We have that option. However, like I was saying, you want to create multiple versions. So sometimes we know there's been an action. So the action here is that the barrel has been crushed. So we might take the barrel and crush it a bit like that, and maybe distort it slightly in different ways to kind of create that sensation of crushing, which might, so I guess it would actually be more like that. So we've got a little bit of you know, I don't know, that's actually not exactly what we were hoping for. So then there's distressing, the idea that certain barrels will look different because they've been damaged. The other idea is that we can overlay, so we would have a general image of white on black so that we could overlay it, so it would look like this, and we would have something like that. Okay, and maybe we would have several you know, compound versions of that. Okay, and that would be the charcoal that ends up on top of the barrel. So you could test it by simply overlaying it. Let's do an overlay, multiplying. Alright, so now we have a barrel that we can test it on. So as it got shot, there would be kind of a transition between these. Now that's only 2 frames. We would want more frames than that, but it certainly is one option for doing burned and other manipulations of objects, scratched, broken glass, things like that. We can do cracked, like, so if you wanted to create like a the illusion of cracked glass, right? So we have a bullet hole here, kind of pattern. Alright, and then maybe a little bit there. Okay, now we have some cracks that allude to a bullet hole selected. Alright, and we can just fill that in with a neutral color of gray if we wanted it to be tintable. Right. So if I hide that, then you see that. So then we have this crack that we can apply to objects. But it would fit within a certain size, so it was made at this size, so it would probably only be used on tiles of the same size. So this would work well with our previous distressing of the tile here. So let me grab the original. Alright, and then we would add it and put the distressed piece. Looks like the resolution is a little different here. So it would have to be probably the same resolution. It doesn't have to be exactly the same. I can always make adjustments, but that sort of thing to create a new distressed look could be applied by the engine instead of by the artist. But the artist would draw the piece that was stuck there. However, you know, like you could see that, and then if this, we use this screen shake, right, effect, along with that, it could show that it's cracking. Okay, so maybe there would be a transition between the cracks, creating kind of an animation of crack, of the crack forming. All right, moving on. So that's some other machines we can create. There's the chain. There's the animated sequence that appears. That could, you know, I've shown a digit animated, but it really could be anything. A person running, or you know, sparks. It throws a little spark, and then we can overlay that like a glow. So if we had an animation of an explosion of sparks, we could, and it was tiny, we could overlay it on a section. Also, this could be handled using a particle system, and the particle system could essentially draw the trail of the spark itself. So we have options. I think I would prefer any of them. They're all equally good. It's a little more efficient to use a particle system in some respects, but if you know, it uses memory in the other way. So you know, it's always a trade-off, one to the other, between various things. So there you go. I didn't cover some of it, but you can imagine that if you were making a complex piece, let me show you the mock-up real quick. You can imagine this is a static mock-up, but there's a lot going on here. I'll just go through it. This is what I was hoping to describe with it. Here we have the main character. We have actually 4 layers of parallax. We have the purple background. We have or maybe even 5. We have the purple background, which is static or perhaps moves only slightly. We have this pink planet that's in front of that. It moves at a certain rate. This moves a little bit faster, and it's a bigger planet. Then we have the glare of the window, okay, or the glossiness, and that is definitely another layer, and it may be in sync with this layer, right, which is the portal itself. But then the portal moves at a slower rate than the world moves, which moves in sync with the guy. So the guy moves equal to the world. Then in front of that, you can imagine a foreground layer. Okay, and I'll just make this bigger, but we would, of course, want to do something a little more detailed in the front. Okay, and this would move at a different rate than the middle. You've played these games before, but I'm just pointing out. And then I think you can only get away with 2 or 3 of those levels. So you could have a third layer in front that moves at an even faster rate. Like, and you could maybe use that more for a chase sequence than you would for anything else. So there you go. All the parallax layers are there, and then this thing would be animated, but it could be animated in 2 different ways. So I don't know if this was clear or not, but I have images, and let me show you those. I think that kid got me sick at the bar last night, which is making me a little nervous. But here we go. Documents, downloads, documents. V for Visual Studio, E or P for projects, E for Empire. So then Empire in the Sky, data. So for Empire in the Sky, we do have some of this stuff already. You go to images, there's a flares folder, and these are all the flares I use. Now, ideally they would all be black and white, but some of them I wanted to create some variation in color. But generally they're black and white, so we have all of these already. So you can just, you know, I can make the engine pulse one of these on a particular point. So for instance, for this panel, maybe we would take this one, and this flare, which looks like this, right? And when it's pulsing, it looks pretty good. There's a link I'll send you that has an image on YouTube. So the engine would use a linear add on the flare, and you can see how, you can imagine with this moving around, it really does look like a light source. And that's how they do that in OpenGL, and that's exactly what we'll be doing. Let me scale it down a little bit since we're only trying to describe the flare on a very small object, so I'll just make it tiny, and then we'll move it up here. Okay, so one of the things that we can do in OpenGL is make something glow intermittently and color it, but we're just going to use white for now. So you can imagine like it's blinking, right? That means one thing. There's the slow kind of transition up and down. So these are all sorts of things that are pretty packaged already. We don't need to do them. So all you would have to do as an artist is say glow it around this area, you know, as a note along with a particular tile. Obviously, I can programmatically program this so that the first one went off, then the second one went off, or because of something changing in the user's, in the level state. So if you've opened a door, that one opens, and then when the door closes, it turns off. Then you opened a different door, so when you opened that different door, the next one turned on. You see? Etc. So all of that stuff is programmatic and can be done, and has all sorts of interesting ideas associated with it. So that being said, that pretty much wraps up my techniques section. Of course, there will be specific things to any game, but those are the general techniques that we've already got stuff for. We can talk a little bit more about the 2D shaders as they develop. So it's been a pleasure.